Good afternoon, everybody. I'm attorney Danyl Patterson, candidate for the 190th state rep seat. For those who don't know, that's West Philly, baby. Today is going to be an interesting one, and I pulled out the legal highlights today because now we're going to be talking about the stuff that I really know, that I personally have handled every day for the last 20 years, and that is protecting your civil rights. As you all know, I'm an attorney, and many ask me exactly what kind of cases do I do, and we talk about what exactly is being a claimant's attorney, meaning who protects you when you have any kind of crisis, be that a slip and fall, a medical negligence case, a nursing home negligence case, or joining me today, Mr. Gary Bailey, Esquire. Say, hey, Gary, introduce yourself.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for having me today. My name is Attorney Gary Bailey. I'm a personal injury and civil rights advocate here in the Philadelphia area. Those are my specialties, and I'm excited, Danielle, that we could talk about something that's near and dear to our heart, which is protecting our people.
Yes, and that's what I mean. That's exactly right. People have always asked me, how do you feel doing what you do? And I'm like, no, I'm here for the people. I'm protecting the folks. And in many cases, the cases that Gary and I and others like us do, we're the ones that help make law to protect you all in the long run. So case by case, we impact you, but on a large scale, we change policies, hospital policies, policies for your work. Just like, unions are responsible for your 40-hour work week. When the unions had their 40-hour work week and it's violated, then they come to the attorneys because now the contract has to be disputed because we are the ones who enforce those violations. So the attorneys are always here for you. And very specifically, the kinds of attorneys that Gary and I are, we're so community-based and community-oriented that we've always reached back, which is kind of where Legal Lessons for Life originated from. I told you guys about that. And so when I saw kind of a trend going on, I said, you know what? Started talking to Gary about it. And he was like, look, the law is really changing. I said, oh, it's kind of going to be bananas. He was like, all right, let's talk about it. Oh, thanks, Tamika. Yes, thank you. We're always out here trying to give out the good information. We appreciate that. And we appreciate you joining us today. So the conversation got started because I called Gary about the Walmart case. That's just, and so people who don't know, I'm going to tell you something a little bit interesting about me. I am not a Walmart shopper. I am one of them Target people. And people say, oh, it's because you're bougie. I said, no, it's actually not that. I've been practicing personal injury for so long that I know that there are actually more claimants' actions against Walmart than all other retail outlets combined. So that means against Walmart. So you have Walmart over here, and then you have JCPenney, Sears, Kohl's, Target, BJ's, New York and Company, Lord and Taylor, anything else you can think of, Ace, even Home Depot does not meet up. And you would think Home Depot would because of, kind of those hammers and nails can get dangerous in there. But no, Walmart has a policy of stacking it tight and stacking it high. And as a result, boxes fall on your head. They sell caskets down south and they fall on people and maimed them. And those carts, they've run over people, over their feet. And so as a result, I actually went into a Walmart back when the Wii came out. I'm going to tell you how old I am. Back when the Wii came out, I went to go and get my niece one. And so I was out in the parking lot at Walmart at 3 a.m. and went in the store and had a panic attack because they were in there about to fight over those things. And I was so glad that I had one of my girlfriends with me because I was like, you ain't about to get this week. So what if I was up all night long to go get it? I'm not going in here with this madness because I was so afraid I was getting ready to lose some fingers and toes messing around Walmart. But the point here is that when we talk about who's protecting you and making Walmart change their policies, it's attorneys like me and Gary. So we're here today to tell you what we see coming down the pike in some new changes in law, how it's going to directly impact us. And it's going to directly impact us twice. The folks who are in these jobs are the people who are most likely to look like, me and Gary. They're folks who live in my community. I've been talking to you guys now for a month that Black and brown people and people in inner cities have been disproportionately affected by this crisis, but not just with the health of it, also the economics disparity of it. Meaning, we're likely to be those folks who are told we're essential employees to make sure that your shop right is clean so you can come and get your food or you can get your food delivery. We're the folks still doing the deliveries, from your local restaurant. We're the folks who are still, cleaning out those office buildings. We're the folks who are still cleaning the hospitals. And you know that one of the things has been that they have not gotten their PPE for even the janitorial services. It's people that look like us who are going to be most impacted by this economically. And it's going to continue because why? Tell them about it, Gary.
Well, it's going to continue because we're going to be opening back up soon. One of the issues that everyone has to be aware of is that during this time that the government and the world at large was not really responding to the COVID outbreak, that's going to be a time up until now to where employers are going to have a lot of wiggle room to get out of this. So just as a fundamental basis for anyone to understand, when you sue someone for negligence, in this case, which would it be, especially for work-related injuries, you have to show notice, right? And notice comes down to either you knew or you should have known that your actions would have led to a particular harm. And what employers are going to start doing is saying, well, during this time, we didn't know how it spread, we didn't know who had it, and we didn't know how to protect from it. So you're going to have a ton of people, let's say from May 1st going all the way back, that contracted COVID potentially at work, but can't prove that they got it from work. So moving forward, once things start to open up, that's where, the law hopefully will change, and we're going to get into some of that, but where waters are going to be very murky and very hostile, because naturally employers are going to try to eliminate either workers who that they think are not good workers and just straight try to fire them, or they're going to try to shift the burden and the blame to someone outside of the employment atmosphere so that their insurance premiums are not covering the sicknesses.
And we're going to have a lot of byplay, and you're already seeing it. The reason that they're talking about opening up really doesn't have anything to do with me and you. It has everything to do with big business. They're out here, you see, it is the auto lobby, that they want to open their dealerships back up. It's the lobbyists are working real hard to make sure that they can open back up so that me and you can go to work. So we're the ones that are at the front line putting our lives on the line, and they're the ones that are making the money. And so what's happening? While they're lobbying for that, they're also lobbying for exclusions, for laws to not apply. So Gary, if you can explain immunity. So I've actually tried to explain this many times. People go, I'm going to sue for whatever. And how many times have you had to explain to somebody coming into your office that you can't sue for that because the government doesn't let you?
Yes. Well, let's even go to the higher part of it. You can't. People think that you can just sue for any reason, and that's not the case, right? Yeah. The law has to give you what's called a cause of action, meaning there has to be something on the books that says you can sue for tripping on somebody's property, or you can sue for someone injuring you in a car accident, or you can sue for medical malpractice. So there has to be a law in place giving you that right. Now, as it relates to immunity, the government, whether it's the federal government, state or local, is immune from lawsuits. That's the rule. What we understand and what we see on a daily basis are those exceptions, right? So here in Pennsylvania, there are some carve out for exceptions, such as if it's an automobile accident, if you fall on a city property, if you're injured by a city worker. Like there are certain different exclusions that are carved out that allow you to sue the state or the city for these small specific reasons. Everything else is an absolute bar. What's likely going to, well, I shouldn't say likely, what potentially could happen is that the federal government may step in and say, okay, for any COVID related illness or death, et cetera, you can't sue the federal government, which is going to include federal workers, employees, and everything, of the likes. That's going to be automatic. But then regular citizens are not going to be able, because somebody posted this on my timeline a few days ago. For all these people that died, can't we sue the government because they lied to us? And the answer is no, you can't. And not only you not do it? It's likely that the government will never put in for that, because think of how many people are going to rush to the courthouse to sue the government for speculation. Forget the cases that are automatic, just off of speculation. And that's why the government only puts in a few narrow exceptions. The second thing is, if the federal government puts in a prohibition, states can't make a law going around that. So if the federal government says, listen, you can't sue your employer for COVID related stuff, then employers can change it and make it more beneficial. Okay, they can say, well, fine, we'll allow it that you can, sue certain under certain laws so that you can collect against it. But if the flip side is the government says, well, look, everybody can sue, take it up with your employer, then the state can't put a law on place blocking that. So just understand that if the state restricts something, the federal government restricts something, the states can't go around it and unrestrict it. If the federal government gives us freedom to do something, the states can't make a law restricting that freedom. And that's going to be the interplay. Now, if people are really paying attention, as you can see, the Trump administration is staying hands off on declaring a national emergency. They haven't made any law yet, and they really haven't given a lot of direction. They've given, suggestions, okay? Not even straight executive orders. And that's really important, because what essentially
it's very and this is what I want all of you to understand. So one of the things that we constantly say, oh my God, they're so confused, they're changing it every day. It's being changed every day on purpose. So, and you all know this, because they'll tell you that they'll give you information that they've had for a couple days before they give it to you, before they change something. Well, that's to create one, confusion in the public, but it's also to protect everybody else. Because with the constant changing influx, that creates more of the narrative of we were having an emergency response, an emergency crisis. We didn't know what to do. And they're going to use this later on in potential lawsuits to basically to bolster their position. It's going to be the defense position that they didn't know, or they were acting in the best interest with the information that they had.
And let's add to that, right? So one of the things that is likely coming down the line is for really overzealous employers, they're going to probably require you to disclose if you had COVID, right? And if you come down with it while you're working, to also disclose that, because that's going to be a way that they can deny you benefits, either for lying before or after the fact. Second part to that is right now, the states are relying on an old Supreme Court law that basically allows them to release your health information because it's in the context of an infectious disease and for the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. So if you do contract COVID, it's very likely that your employer will name you and let other employees know that you had it, and that's why you're not here anymore, so that they can protect themselves and say, well, you knew that this person had it and you should have kept your distance, or at least moving forward, keep your distance. So it's going to be a lot of secrecy unveiled. There's going to be a lot of people's information put on the front page regarding how this is going to, how this infection is going to play out. And again, it's, as Danyl said, it's to murky the waters of notice, because as long as they can put out there that they didn't know, or they did everything that they could to protect you and it was reasonable, a lot of cases are going to get denied in that first wave, and it's going to be, hard to deal with. A lot of people are going to get doors slammed in their face for that reason. So one of the things that people really need to make sure that if you do contract this at work, do everything in your power to narrow down patient zero, okay? Because if there can be any doubt that you caught it from a neighbor, from a friend, public transportation, anything, you're going to be out. So you need to be very cautious and very aware of who you're working with, what their symptoms are, anything that gives you any idea. And by the way, inquire into your employer. Hey, does John have COVID? Because if they lie to you, they're going to be in trouble. But if they tell you the truth,
there's a lot that you just talked about, and I want to unpack it for the people, because again, Gary and I, you're definitely in the wheelhouse right here. So this turned into a whole conversation for us. Okay, so Ish, we're actually going to come back to that because one of the things that we now know is that there are people who had COVID-19 or who have COVID-19 who are asymptomatic. So it's not even whether or not they beat it, it's whether or not you're asymptomatic. So whether or not you can still spread the virus. Because
Right.
don't forget, Ish, that was a part of the misinformation in the beginning, according to the governor down in Mississippi who said he didn't know you could get it if you were asymptomatic. So, but everybody else in the world knew that, but him. I don't know because apparently they just didn't tell them down there.
Yeah.
But so there was a lot of information. I want to make sure that you guys got it, and I'm going to give you all two different big cases that everybody knows about. Two big issues in our society that everybody knows about: guns and tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
And they were groundbreaking with regards to what can be sued, who can be sued, and under what circumstances. Michelle, we're going to get back to you, and we're going to talk about the HIPAA laws and how they're going to impact this some more. But I kind of got to start here to lay the foundation for you. So you may not know, the gun lobby was so strong that manufacturers cannot be sued for their product. So early on in these litigation, what they were being sued for, and so what happened was they were suing, okay, you made these guns. And then that's when the idea that people with guns kill people, not guns. Okay. So then what happened was there was some brilliant person who said, you made these guns easily manipulatable. Is that a word? I don't know.
Easy to manipulate.
I don't know. There you go. It's a crisis, so it's an emergency. So I can get my Jesse Jackson on, and it's a word right now. Manipulatable. There you go. Manipulated. There you go. That you made the guns so that they could be easily manipulated, so they could be rapid fire, shoot 3,000 rounds in a minute, and that's when those cases got through, because they were able to prove that the gun manufacturer did in fact know that this is what was actually how the online modifications that were being made, and not just the online modifications, but that they were actually selling the pieces that you can modify the guns with. So it wasn't just that they, clearly they knew it, because they were able to then sell the aftermarket additions to the guns. So that's how that law actually got changed. Very similar. The other is tobacco. And I know these tobacco cases have been going on since the 80s, the 70s, right? Might have been the 70s. It wasn't until the mid 90s that somebody actually figured out what the key was. And it was not just about the smoking, it was about the addiction, the addition of nicotine, and it was specifically added to the cigarettes to increase your need for the cigarette such that you couldn't get away from it. So the actual illness from this didn't change, meaning that they know what the mesothelioma was, but what they were able to actually bring it down to and isolate the causes. Similarly, now we got the rest of that. Also mesothelioma. It was the what's that stuff that causes it? The
Asbestos.
huh?
Asbestos.
Yeah, there you go. I'm like, what's that stuff? There you go. The asbestos causing the mesothelioma. It was the same thing, because people were saying, well, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, everything had asbestos in it. It was actually considered standard material. But then what happened? We knew that they knew when they started putting them in the properties in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that they had the threat to actually cause this. They said, oh, no, that doesn't fly, because just because you worked at the Bud Factory, or you worked at Tasty Cake, or you worked at Nabisco for 45 years, and now you got the mesothelioma, you had 3 cigarettes. And I see these cases all the time, even when we're starting to talk about cancer and failure to diagnose in the medical field. We'll have, a diabetic patient who has breast cancer, and the mesh that's supposed to, do the reconstruction for the breast, it falls apart. So the answer becomes not that they didn't do the surgery correct. It failed because you smoked 2 cigarettes. And so therefore your blood vessels don't carry the blood supply correctly to permit you to be able to heal. So there's going to be, and I'm just giving you all of that so you see the circular denial of it, that it all comes back to the burden of proof. So, and I'm going to, so, and because Rob Bridgeway just asked about that, the burden of proof. So what it is more likely than not. So it's not, this is not a criminal case where the burden of proof is that high. It's a 51-49 standard. So it's kind of, take the scales, and if the information ever tips so lightly, then you are at a preponderance of the evidence and you can find on their behalf. But if it's not, if it's 50-50, it's a defense verdict.
And Daniel, if I can add to that part, look at it this way. If you can show one person had it at work, but two of your family members had it, it's going to be a problem.
Yes.
If you can show three people had it at work, but you live alone and didn't come in contact with anybody that had it, it's going to be the employer's problem.
Now, the other thing, so now everybody's really on the you can hear that ish. Well, this is what happened when the studio in your house. This is what happened. Okay, say hi to Oreo. Everybody say hi to Oreo. He just came in to Barkenshaw. Okay, so but so now, okay, they're definitely on it because Zahira and now Will Mega and even Ish are like, okay, what do you mean by HIPAA rights? Okay, so I'm going to take y'all back to the 80s and 80s. We're going to start there. And a lot of these things is the law is ever changing. So, and this is why, like somebody said to me, why you always got to tell a story? I always had to tell a story. One of the things that we talk about in the law, when we're even making the law, is about legislative intent. Because when we start to take it to the courts, like, me and Gary can sit around and go, oh, that's a great idea. We're going to pass this law. And then what happens is time to interpret the law in the courts. And the courts say, no, that wasn't the intent of the law. It's not in the good faith efforts of the law. You're not acting with the true intent of the law. So this is the reason I tell these stories, so you can see the evolution of these here things. So we had HIV/AIDS. It was new. There have always been something in the law called a loathsome disease. So those diseases that would cause such embarrassment that someone would know that you have them, such that they could never be disclosed. Okay. So, and that the loathsome diseases are so significant that, and you may not know this, in Pennsylvania, me and Gary could get married. This is, predating all the laws. Me and Gary could get married and not have a blood test. You don't have to have a blood test, but you have to disclose to each other whether or not you have a loathsome disease. Now, I could walk over with cancer and me and Gary could get married. And I didn't tell Gary about that cancer, but Gary couldn't divorce me once he found out I had cancer because it didn't fall in loathsome disease. But if me and Gary got married and then afterwards I gave him herpes, then Gary could divorce me because that's a loathsome disease, the kind that you don't want to speak about in society. And for those of you who don't know, I'm gonna give y'all a Color Purple reference. It's kind of like them nasty women diseases, and that's where HIV. That's what it was. Remember, the old man would say, he was like, she got one of them nasty women diseases. But that's what it was. So then we had HIV/AIDS, and it hit us like a tsunami. And that in New York and Toronto and in San Francisco, the deaths were ridiculous. They didn't know what to do. People were afraid. And guess what? People's health status start getting leaked, which is something that had never happened before. There was actually no law around it. It just kind of like they didn't do it, right? And then they started doing it. Why? Because we don't understand the disease. So I'm going to tell you that Magic Johnson has, right? Johnson, right?
Yeah.
I call it all the Magic Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm like, wait a minute. Right. Magic Johnson had AIDS, and then people didn't want to play on the basketball court with him because they didn't understand how it was transmitted. Okay, now we don't want to be in the same locker room with them, or that. And this was all the argument. We don't know how it's contracted and spread, so you have to tell us if you are HIV positive. And so then shortly thereafter, we got the Clintons in office, and President Clinton said, no, you don't have to tell. As a matter of fact, there's something came along called HIPAA. And HIPAA said, matter of fact, not only do you not have to tell, you can't tell. And the reason this became so important, it wasn't about the health and safety, it was about insurance. HIPAA actually came along because of insurance denials. And so I give you this long story because this is right back where we are right now. Insurance denials. They didn't let you, they didn't, your health information was protected so that employers couldn't discriminate you on whether or not they would hire you. You couldn't have your work hours altered or changed because you had 6 toes or whatever your problem was. They didn't have to know about your tumor. Now if you had confusion at work and you couldn't do your job, that's one thing. But you didn't have to actually give anybody any specific information about you. And now the idea is quite possibly that you oh wow, Zahira, this is fascinating. We'll have to talk about that. She just said we discovered the first pediatric HIV case here in Philadelphia. That's just interesting. And aside, so now this is where we're going, because what happens? We need to identify who patient 0 is. If I'm in the office, me and Gary are in the office, let's say we're in the office literally next door to each other like we are on the screen, and Gary over there coughing up a lung, and Danyl fine. I've been in quarantine all this time, isolating, and Gary been out gallivanting around and doing whatever else he's doing, and Danyel's afraid, and I go to HR. Now I want to know, am I at risk? And there's going to be a lawyer that's going to pick that case up. What you think, Gary?
Without question. And it's a balancing act, right? So it was good that you brought up the loathsome diseases, because there's a social stigma that goes along with that. But then the other part was, you can't catch those just by touch. You can't catch them by hug. You can't catch them by the air. Where we're dealing with an infectious disease that, according to the CDC, WHO, this is a disease that is highly contagious and communicable just by human interaction. So the balancing test versus whether or not someone is embarrassed about it versus letting someone else know so that they don't contract it because they're in close quarters. My personal opinion is we should know, because we should have a right to self-quarantine ourselves or create that distance. And quite frankly, put that person in position to go home and get healthy. So certainly is going to be an issue where you're going to have some mismanagement of that, right? You're going to have some horrible employees that are just going to leak it for the sake of. You're probably going to have some people that are going to assume. You're going to have a lot of sinister things that come along with that. But again, the bigger envelope is you have to know to protect yourself. But then if you do have it and you've contracted it from somewhere, you have to make sure, you probably got to be willing to give that information to your employer, because again, that's where they're going to use, either try to fire you or to deny you health benefits because you didn't let your employer know if you had symptoms. That's the other part too, right? Until we have fully transparent tests that you can submit to that everyone can get, they're going to try to use it just to say if you had the symptoms. So you might not even know whether or not you had it, right? But you're going to have to probably tell them you have the symptoms, which is, what we know, the fever, the sore throat, the breathing, all those things. So you're going to be in that position to where maybe you just have the regular flu, the regular influenza. You have some of the similar symptoms, but if you tell your employer, they're going to stamp you as, COVID symptoms. And maybe even put you in self-isolation until they can get you tested and you can, come back either with a negative test or you had it and it's no longer in your system. So again, we're going to be traveling very murky waters, and you have to know how to protect yourself as well as know what your rights are, because yes, you could be that person whose information is given out theoretically to protect the rest of your employees and your employer's business at large.
Well, and don't forget, in many organizations already, even where they're essential workers, they're requiring that they take your temperature when you come into the building.
Right to the forehead.
So, right, yeah, I was gonna say, so, which is even more ridiculous because we all know the forehead temperatures actually are not that accurate. So so we actually know that, but and it's not, they're not all being administered by, like doctors and nurses. It's like basically Danyl is like the HR person, and so I take your temperature. What do I know? It look elevated to me.
Well,
It's not 98.9, and we all know that actually, depending upon who you are, it might be lower or a little bit higher, but that would still put you out of work. Now, actually, we got Mary has some very interesting questions,
and
very
I
specific.
and let me add this, Danielle, too. I was thinking of that also, and I actually have my own thermometer. Because I said, if we ever get to that point, I'm not going to be out there leaving, somebody with a machine that they're using all day to check my temperature. I'm going to have my own. So if somehow I'm hitting a hot spot, and make sure I have my own and check my temperature too. And if we just got to go back and forth about it, then we have to go back and forth about it. But I'm not leaving myself out there just for somebody with a machine to somehow. I mean, I'm looking at it from the I Am Legend part, right, where they check Richardson, and she had the disease, and all of a sudden guns is drawn. He's saying check it again. They checked it again, and it went okay. I'm not looking for that. I'm gonna have my own, and we're gonna do it at the same time. And they better read the same thing at the same time. So.
Well, I'm gonna see you on your I Am Legend moment out here. Yeah. I'm gonna make sure you go live when they do it. It's like, you don't happen if you didn't go live. Mary had a specific question. So what about furlough before but symptoms after? Any obligations? So what about furlough before? So you were laid off and you came back to the job and you had symptoms. I just trying to understand that, Mary. If you could explain that a little bit more.
It sounds like that's what she means. And again, and maybe she came a little bit late, but employers are going to have a lot of wiggle room to not deal with anyone prior to it becoming a national pandemic, because they're going to say, we didn't know who had it. We didn't know how it was transmitted, and we didn't know how to test people. So we can't be on the hook for anyone that would have caught it. I'm just saying, as an example, probably before May 1st,
Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, if you have the symptoms, and again, let's think worst case scenario. If you have the symptoms, worst case scenario, they're not going to let you return pending a test saying that you don't have it, because everyone doesn't have a test. So they're going to ask you to confirm whether or not you have the symptoms. And if you have the symptoms, they're probably going to say you to stay home. If you lie about it and then they find out later that you had the symptoms and ultimately tested positive for the test, they're going to deny your benefits. You can bet your dollar on that.
Well, actually, okay. So Mary, yeah. So she said, what about work during incubation? So she was following up. Thank you. I appreciate that, Mary. So yes, we actually talked about this. So let's say that they tell us we're in Pennsylvania, and I know you aren't, Mary, and so thank you for tuning in. So we're in Pennsylvania, and one of the things the Republicans and the Democrats are basically arguing right now about whether or not they're going to reopen for specific set of businesses. Okay. Now, what we do know is that the Republicans don't have a supermajority, meaning they can't override a gubernatorial veto. So this is going to be about interesting, but they control both the House and the Senate here by a slim majority. So this is really going to be interesting. And our governor is the one who put the executive order in to shut everything down. And Pennsylvania actually has been rated the CDC or whatever rates you according to how you dealt with the response. Pennsylvania has the only A in the nation right now.
Wow,
Because Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf stepped in and said it and shut it down immediately. He shut everything down. There were no exceptions. Everybody go home. There was not lawyers are essential, and I know the Florida folks, I hear it all the time. They're like, we're essential here. And so they're still going into the office, or in New York, family court was essential. And then they had 1,000 people in the family court. So, but anyway, so what happens is that people, so now they're trying to open the government back up. Well, one of the things is here. So you go back to work, you've been home for 14 days or 15 days because you've been laid off. As we all were theoretically, and you go back to work and you're asymptomatic, and now so Danyl and Gary have both, like I said, been home, and Danyel's Gary's asymptomatic, but he's actually a carrier. Danyl doesn't have, let's say I had, because I actually did have a couple of COVID tests. That's a long story. I told y'all about it in a live. It was harrowing. So I know that I was negative and had been home and hadn't done anything else. And I go back to the office because they told me to. Gary thought he was fine. He was asymptomatic. And So now it becomes Danyl gets it, contracts it from Gary, who's right next door to me in his next office, and then it becomes proving that Gary was asymptomatic, not negative. So there's going to be a difference because are our employers going to have to require that everybody have a negative test when that's actually read before they come back in, or is it going to be that everybody's asymptomatic? We really don't know, but we can see the lawsuits coming from it.
Yeah, and one of the things that's going to be critical is what the CDC guidelines are, right? Hopefully, the CDC guidelines will say during this still phase that we're in that they require employers to furnish you with equipment, whether it's a mask, antibacterial, or anything else, as in addition to distance requirements. So not having people packed in cubicles in a poorly ventilated area with just AC pumping the germs all around. If the CDC does not give essential guidelines for which now the states can adopt, we're going to be, in a hellhole, because you're going to leave employers to just basically do what they want. They're going to say, well, listen, we did a survey of all our incoming employees. Nobody had the symptoms. So come on in back to work, and that's
exactly
the
where
scary
we are with, I'm sorry, and this is exactly where we are. Bright Eyes just said an employer was advised that employee was exposed to COVID and to COVID patients, and the employer said, come as long as you don't have a fever. So basically, this employer went outside of what was CDC protocol at that point, because in actuality, and this is the reason there was in the whole New York, New Jersey, Connecticut fight, because New York, the exposure rate was so high. And so people were like, escaping to their vacation homes in Connecticut. And did you know this one? But escaping to their vacation homes in the Poconos. So what's happened? Luzerne County, Monroe County, and Luzerne, Monroe, I just forgot the third one, are now hotspots, and they're actually getting infected, or they actually are testing positive at a rate that is actually higher than Philadelphia per capita. So they have a small population, and what they're looking at is their population is actually mostly summer vacation homes that people put out on Airbnb. The same thing is going on in the Catskill Mountains, the same thing. So they said, hey, come here, and now they got a big surge. But yes, Bright Eyes, that was actually in violation of the CDC recommendations. If you had been exposed, you had a known exposure, then you were actually supposed to go get a test, and you were supposed to quarantine, to self-isolate until the test results came back.
And in some cases, they were saying at least 10 days, irrespective of the test, because at least you have a minimum incubation period to know that it passed through your system without any symptoms.
Wow. So the employers are not encouraging isolation. Well, again, we're very lucky that we do live in Pennsylvania, where they're definitely encouraging isolation. As a matter of fact, they've started with fines for people who are gathering outside. They went and they finally locked the plat, so they really tried to let people do it. And when they didn't, it really became about government regulation and mandate. We were very fortunate there. And I guess that's why Governor Wolf and the folks in Pennsylvania, got that A, and they've been holding on to it for weeks. With only, I think it is the mayor of LA who's actually considered to actually be beating the curve. So, kudos to the two coasts there.
And Daniel, just to add, I think from Ms. Bright Eyes, what's important for anyone that's in an employer situation like that, cover yourself. So if your employer wants you to come back and what you perceive as a zone of danger, make them give you a document saying that they're going to protect you if you catch it. If you have human resources, that's the first meeting you need to have. Say, listen, I'll come back to work, but I can't wait to see how murky this is. I need you to sign saying that if I get sick with COVID, that you're going to cover my, my bills and anything that flows from it. You're going to give me sick pay, whatever the case may be. Don't leave yourself out there, because if they deny and say no, well, at least you have something in writing stated that they knew the danger, even though they denied you, so that when you got sick, okay, they can't say, well, we didn't know, we had no understanding. Like, they can't use it. Get as much as you can in writing, but do not, now understand this, unless you have the most unwittingly risk that you want to take. Under no circumstance should you sign a waiver stating that you are responsible and that you assume the risk of going back to work. That is a trap of the highest ilk. And any employer that gives you something that says you assume the risk is setting you up for failure. Otherwise, why would they have you sign that?
Well, let me actually explain something to you. And Gary, what's your number there so they can reach out to you? Let me make sure I put it there.
267-225.
267.
225-5442. That's the office number. Then I'll give you my direct number, 267-225-5898.
I would tell y'all to call the assistant because, lawyers ain't exactly the best at answering our personal phones, especially once we get back to the office hours. I'm going to just be frank with you. You do much better talking to my assistant and her making me call you than me actually answering the phone. But so let's talk about why all of this talk. And this is why it's very interesting. So right now we're at a crossroads. So we're looking at unemployment compensation versus workers' compensation. And let me tell you why that's very important, right? So let's say we're talking about, even if it's an at-will position, Bright Eyes, technically, if somebody's, if somebody is infringing on your civil rights and you use that to protect yourself, even in an at-will employee state is a cause of action. So that's important that you brought that up. And so that's the reason I also asked for Gary's number, because we want to make sure that when you get into those situations, don't try to figure it out yourself. Call one of us. You can always call my office is 267-291-4702, 267-491-4702. Don't try to figure it out yourself, because honestly, I'm going to tell you my biggest pet peeve. My biggest pet peeve is when Gary is my client and he comes to me and tell me what Pookie's cousin Barbara told him the other night at the bar, because his case was just like this one. And I don't know why you telling me different. Okay. No two cases, no two fact patterns are absolutely the same. I ain't had one in my 20 years of practice. How about you there, Gary?
No, the only thing that's the same is me. Everyone has at least one difference, and starting with the people involved. So, and even people that we represent that have multiple cases, their cases are never the same. It's always something different. That's called life.
Yeah, Gilda, my number has been posted and Gary's numbers in the comments above. Gary's numbers are in the comments, and we'll make sure that we continue to post them. Now, and the reason I want to talk to you about unemployment compensation versus workers' compensation, and this is when I say that they're smarter than we are, okay? So let's say you're a furloughed employee. We're going to actually go back to Mary and Bright Eyes' fact pattern. So you're a furloughed employee and you return to work, and something's going on, and now they have determined that you got the COVID-19, and now we're fighting. Did I get it from Gary? Did I get it from wherever else I was? The HIPAA waiver. I done told them that I had the COVID-19. And so they decided to lay me off now, right? So now I go and I want to apply for unemployment compensation. I'm specifically going to talk about Pennsylvania law, because the laws are a little bit different in every state. But I can tell you in Pennsylvania and our surrounding states, we're pretty much the same. But Pennsylvania directly, because that's mostly the folks who are following us. The very first question that they ask you when you apply for unemployment compensation is what, Gary?
Are you able to work?
Exactly. And so there have been folks who gotten laid off because they were sick, because they were cancer patients. And so there have been people who, well, I can't, my grandmother is sick and I'm taking care of her, I'm applying for FMLA. FMLA just says if that, the company has so many employees, they got to keep the job open, not that you have to get money during that time. Right. So now they done put everybody back to work and got us all off unemployment, because this is the whole point, is putting us back to work. Everybody's off unemployment. So now these unemployment claims go down. And now I go to work and I got the COVID. And now they say, okay, Ms. Patterson, so you need to go back home. Well, guess what? Now I can't get unemployment because I'm not technically able to work. I may have gotten laid off, but I'm technically not able to work.
And the reason is because you didn't catch it at work. You caught it at home out in the streets.
Now, if I caught it at work, now it moves from the state worrying about my unemployment compensation benefits and numbers, and now it becomes a workers' comp claim. And workers' comp insurance is private insurance that is not a part of the state system. Everybody pays into workers' comp, and it is entirely a separate fund, and it looks real good to their jobless numbers. Because let's talk about it. It's about jobless numbers than it does to say we got all these people filing for unemployment, because they don't tell you how many people file for workers' comp. And they don't tell you how many people file for disability, because that's the rest of where it goes. So let's say you go out on workers' comp, or even if your boss says, okay, we're going to put you out on disability. Disability is private insurance initially, when you're talking about short term, because most people do recover from COVID. That's fabulous. Most people recover. So if you're out for a couple of weeks, now your short-term disability then kicked in. And again, that means that's no that's no weight on the unemployment numbers. And so it looks like our economy continues to boom. And that's very, very important. So all this is a way to float the numbers around and to limit how many of you can get that $600 a week, and how many of you can actually get benefits from your state government, because that's the rest of it. What are our states telling us? So we know Cuomo told us yesterday, New York is broke. That was exactly what he told us. New York is broke. So they don't want all these unemployment claims that they have to pay. So regardless of whether or not the federal government is supplementing, they don't have any money to pay the claims that they already have. So let's push them somewhere else. Let's push them to workers' comp. Let's push them to disability. And let's make it so that you can't personally recover from going through this.
And
somebody
we have something out, Danyl. Listen, whether it flies is coming down the pike. Insurance companies for new participants are going to make they're going to make you have a waiting period, pre-existing condition, and I promise you, COVID is going to be at the top of that list. And not for 2 or 3 weeks. They're probably going to give you a 6 to 7 month if they can pull it off. And here's why: because we're at May now. Flu season is going to start back up again in August, and they're going to be hoping that they can get it at least during that time. So if you catch it on the front end in the next flu season, they can still exclude you. So be very wary and watchful of that.
Because actually, early on, somebody asked me, and I'm sorry, we were so far down in the comments, and I didn't forget about you. But a young lady asked me, and she said, "Hey," she said, "what about the flu? We haven't heard anything about the flu." It was here you go. What happened to the seasonal? What happened to What happened to the seasonal flu? We haven't heard anything about it. I'm assuming that people continue to contract it, but we have heard no mention of it. Yes, we know that there are flu numbers. We know there are flu numbers. And actually, I'm going to tell you this, because I'm somebody who actually had a COVID test. When you go for the COVID test, you get a flu test. You actually get a flu test. When you go for the COVID test, you get a pneumonia test, a flu test, and the COVID test. So it's 2 through your nose. Oh my God, please. And
I got it, man. It's pain. It was painful. It was painful.
And I had to do it 3 times. Like I said, I told y'all I was traumatized. So it's 2 through your nose and 1 down your throat. So 1 is the flu, the other is pneumonia. That's the one down your throat. The one up your nose, the first one is the flu. And the third one that they give you is actually, up your nose, is actually the COVID test. So they actually have the flu numbers. And so the flu has not been as rampant as you think it is. So that's very important, because when we first heard about this, it's like the flu. Yes, it was like the flu, but it was very different as far as the viral strain and what it did for you. And more importantly, how far it knocked you down. Because like the flu, and its symptomology was the beginning, but what we're learning about COVID, and we're learning this, is even when you recover from it, they're saying that it's going to be 18 to 24 months before lung capacity restores. So even though you recovered, your lung capacity still is not back to normal. So they don't know whether or not it's causing scarring of the lungs or anything else from having this virus that are going to impact us long term.
And I think it's also important, Danyl, the CDC put out the guidelines a few weeks ago that any patient that dies with COVID symptoms to automatically call it a COVID death. So, I mean, we just know from a number standpoint, some of the people that are perishing from it probably was just a seasonal flu that went undiagnosed, but because they had similar symptoms. So that number is a little bit inaccurate. But if I recall, back in March, we were already up to about 27,000 seasonal flu deaths. We know that number is probably still growing. Last year, flu season was 65,000. So it's still there, but there's just nobody's paying attention to it because we're dealing with a pandemic that is dominating the headlines, but it's still alive and well.
Yeah, so I just want you to know the common flu does not test positive for COVID, but it's actually an entirely different test. It's even stored a different way. This is one of the reasons that I had so many of them, because they didn't store it correctly. So my flu test came back, but my corona test didn't, because it has to be at a certain temperature when they do something to the something. I don't know. All I know is they told me to come back and they jammed all that down my nose again. That's all I'm gonna say, because I'm traumatized just thinking about it. But thankfully, I've been out there 3 times and they were all negative, and I'm just trying to stay that way through this pandemic, because I have people to take care of, including you all. I got to make sure that I'm here to give you the information, so that we can be on top of it.
Now we probably should add one potential positive glimmer of hope. Last week, or I think it was about 7 or 10 days ago, who was the agency that allows pharmaceuticals for human testing? Why is my mind dropping me right now?
The FDA?
Yes, the FDA approved the rapid response test that they can give, they can give results within 15 minutes. So that has yet to be widespread deployed. Hopefully, since they're talking about, May opening up, and since, probably after that they will have firmly and widespread deployed that 15-minute test, because that will give some people peace of mind, right? That if you can go get the test, you'll know in 15 minutes, okay, you can go back to work. The other thing that they're talking about putting out is what China and South Korea put out, which is that people that have the antibodies will get a bracelet or something that basically can show that they had it, they're fine, there's no recontraction. Again, that goes back to the HIPAA thing. But hopefully, if there's any glimmer of hope, those 2 things will give people positive peace of mind that could give us some semblance of being able to operate even at a slow pace.
And a glimmer of hope for the economy, because the company that's actually been working on this and actually pushed that through was Johnson & Johnson, right there in New Jersey, so right next to us. And we know that we have many Pennsylvanians who are from the Philadelphia area who actually work at J&J. So that means that, manufacturing, they said that they need to have about 6 million tests done. They think they can get it done by the end of June. So somebody's working. Yeah. Somebody's working.
And I think one of the misnomers that has been going on for the past month is it's not that it's not enough tests. It's not enough people to process the tests. And see, that's one of the problems with, and I don't want to get too political, but that's one of the problems with the Trump administration, because he refuses to pay contractors and other companies to process the tests as well as give out other PPE. We don't have a supply of shortage. We have an overabundance of politics, and the politics is saying we're not going to get involved. Leave it up to the states. That was one of the things that the Obama administration did very well during the H1N1, which is he immediately put in federal funding and federal laws in place to make sure that there was transparency and cohesiveness amongst the states, because the federal government oversaw it and made sure that everything was done seamlessly.
So they weren't bidding against each other for the same thing.
The Trump administration is just basically like, listen, you all got it. And mainly because he didn't want to take the fall from it, which is now why he's trying to put all the blame on the WHO. And I mean, it's a mess. But there's not a shortage of tests. There's not a shortage of equipment. It's always been there. He's just not putting in the authority of the federal government and letting the states fight amongst each other, which is sad,
I mean, it's very interesting times that we live in. So we hope that we gave you our initial primer there on the possibilities of our civil rights changing and what's it going to be like as a worker here in Pennsylvania as we start to open back up and we try to protect our own rights. But again, if you have any questions, you can reach either myself, and that's at 267-291-4702. That's 267-291-4702. And we put you in touch with all resources, including Gary Bailey. Or you can call him directly at
267-225-5442. If you're watching this on Facebook, feel free to send me a message on my instant messaging, or you can go to my page, Bailey and Associates LLC. You can message me there. Okay, so those are the best ways actually to get in touch with me, because I'm always checking emails. I'm always corresponding with different people, and sometimes it's way easier to send me a message than it is to call me, because I can respond to that while I'm also talking to someone else.
It has been lovely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gary. What I tell you all the time, I like to bring you the resources. When you don't know, you definitely have to go out and ask somebody. So what didn't I know? How to find out, how to track whether or not you were getting this stimulus checks. Because people are still calling me today that they were supposed to hit. And honey, when they hit, we got banks that have their sites are down. They done crashed. I actually had to call a bank for one of our constituents, and they told us that they were so backlogged, they were actually ringing busy. So the IRS.gov finally put their site up and it crashed. So they've actually given guidance to the tax professionals about what to do and how to be able to access information so that, one, you can know when your payment's on the way, two, confirm that they have the right bank account, three, if you're like me and you pay every year, so you can actually put your information in so you can get a stimulus check if you're entitled to one. So you can get that instead of getting one of those, nice Trump memo line checks in the mail and sometime, who knows when that is. And so we're going to hope to see you tomorrow with the La Petite tax dame, Shauna Collins, tomorrow at 3:30. Thank you so much, Gary. It was a pleasure. Thank you to the folks out there in Philly, especially out there in West Philly, baby. This is Danyl Patterson, candidate for state rep, reminding you that we will do better together. Bye-bye.
Bye.